I also was a photographer in the city and spent a lot of time just really noticing and observing the city. And those things are very important to me. They create a deep understanding of visual vocabulary, so that when I go to start to work on things, it's very improvisational and unplanned. So, to begin with, I started quilting in 2016 with this one piece here, which was the first piece I made when I was given yards and yards of white fabric. And I had a sewing machine, and I started just ripping up pieces and drawing them, and changing the embroidery stitch and kind of trying to do little drawings. And I was kind of expressing things. I was looking for another avenue to express my artistic ideas in some ways, and in other ways to express emotional feelings. And I started this kind of draw stitching is what I was calling it, without any direction or any idea of what would happen. So I ended up with a pile of these pieces. And a friend of mine who was a quilter, who I admired her work for years, and couldn't understand how she ever got all those pieces together and how you go about making a quilt, helped me learn how to assemble and to execute and to engineer the piece. So after I finished this piece, I said, this is an interesting process I'd like to follow through more. It was also about reusing and recycling, because this was leftover fabric from someplace else. So then I started working on this piece here, which was linen left over from curtains I had made. And I tried to variegated thread with this piece. And again, it's about exploring the stitch and the line, and how it's a non-verbal way of expressing an idea for me, and it's really about the drawing and about exploring. Actually, in between these pieces here, I started taking quilting classes. So, because I figured I should kind of figure out what I'm doing. So I took classes with Nancy Crow, who was a great inspiration to me. And the piece over here was one I made after a couple classes. This one here, Movement, was a piece that I made after I came home from a couple classes that I did with her. And it was really trying to get form and color and line and shape into a piece. So that's where that came from. And I kept going back to my black and white. And here, each one of these, when they're assembled and I stitch them, they call to another piece to be made. There's no plan or rhyme or reason as to why I may do this piece here, and then it'll say, or it'll say to me, it needs something more congested, more detail, or more open space. So the pieces keep telling me what to do. There's no preconceived idea. They just kind of need to be out there. So I let the process really drive how the work is going to be made and what's going to happen. And I end up with stacks of these things. And I do them for months on end. And then I start assembling them. And even though I do part assemblage when I'm making them, because something may say, this has to be here next to this piece, these have to go together for some reason. And then at other times, it's just searching through this kind of vocabulary of pieces that I have to see how they work together. So it goes kind of both ways as far as the assemblage of it. These pieces here to me are so expressive of emotion and time and place that I really, each time I make one, it's a real emotional experience. And I don't know what's going to happen next. I find it's a real way of getting into my, I don't know, deep, spiritual, deep, emotional part that we don't have words for, it's untangible. And that's why we make things, I think, because we need to express something that we can't put our finger on, something that is not concrete. That's how I feel when I make things. That it has to be a process for me of both the physicality of making it and also the expression of it, which I only know after I see it. And I only know after I put it together what it's trying to tell me, what I'm trying to tell myself. When I was working on this piece here in particular, I started just thinking about what would it be like if I just simplified my line into just line and just larger shapes. And I often work on pieces at the same time so that they kind of like reflect each other in some way, or they talk to each other through. I feel like they talk to each other and being very different, but similar because they're really dealing with line, form, and shape. Then I went to this piece here and said, how do I combine both the line, the shape, the form, the space, the foreground, and the background, and add the stitch work to it. So that's how this piece came about. So they kind of each influence each other as I'm working. And it keeps asking me questions, what do I want to see, what do I want to create, in very visual terms, not in very, it's hard to put words to it. And then after working on these pieces, I started working on, I like to work in black and white a lot because it's very direct. I feel like it's very non-confusing. I guess that's a word. But this piece here, I started to work on having seen a lot of my moleskin notebooks piled up. And then I saw a couple paintings that really influenced me that were black and white. And I wanted to see how much tension I could create between just these little shapes and the curves and see if I could actually pull it off and do it technically. So that's where these came from. Look, I'm doing this again. Then as I was working on these pieces, which I continue to do these conversation pieces, I started to work larger and in color. And I have the piece downstairs, this piece and two other pieces are really exploring the figure in space and the figure on the ground and creating this imaginary world that just comes to me and asks me. That's all I can say about that. It just really, really, I sketch sometimes a bit of it. I do work with the colors, trying to figure out, auditioning different colors to see what might work together. I do think that I have a really hard time sewing, but I just draw it first, cut it out on the wall, then I figure out how to make it. It's not, I don't know how to start with a concept of how do you create it and then make it. I draw it, I use the rotary cutter as a pencil to cut the fabric and then lay it out, and then I come to the question of how it's going to work. The construction of these is taking me forever because, as I said, I don't know, I'm learning more and more every day how to engineer pieces, but I don't have a plan when I start. It's more the design that comes through, and it has to be like how I I really struggle with things like this because I want that, but I don't know how to make it. So then I had to figure out how to create the scene here, put the pieces together and line them up. Really, as I go along, I mean, I know people who are amazing at planning in advance, but I don't know how to do that. It would be a wonderful thing if I could. And that's the same with this one here, which was, this one I really wanted to see if I could get super graphic on one figure and have the ground just kind of float it on the ground and keep it one gigantic figure. It was a real challenge to me to figure out how to make this all seem like one piece, but by changing the tone and the colors in the fabric. I spent a lot of time thinking, reading, listening, looking, observing, experiencing. And I try to let everything go when I start to work so that all of those experiences can come through and let me make something that I'm not preconceiving too much and let it just kind of come about. And then, as you do improvisational work and spontaneous work, then you start to move into more controls because you're starting to see what's coming out. And you say, oh, now I realize that I need this color, or that shape would look a little better, or I need to tighten this up a little bit. But that's how my work, the process that I do. And I believe in the process of doing it and experiencing it and letting it lead me to make what I do.
Well, thank you very much, Susan.